Production note: the following is an original composite narrative. Names, places, and case details are invented. Verify and replace with sourced facts before publication. At 11:52 on the night of October 4th, 1991, a man called the Vero County Sheriff's Office from a payphone bolted to the outside wall of a Sinclair station in Cobb Hollow, Missouri. The call lasted 28 seconds. The dispatcher on duty, a woman named Loretta Vance, who had worked nights for 11 years and who kept a space heater under the console because the courthouse basement never got above 62 degrees in October, recorded it on a cassette the way she recorded everything. That cassette is the reason this case has never been closed. The caller does not give a name. His voice is low and unhurried. There is wind on the line, and behind the wind there is the specific flat hum of a 2-lane highway at night, the sound a car makes passing 100 feet away. He tells her there is a car sitting on the shoulder of State Route 19, just south of the Dunkard Church turnoff. He tells her the engine is running. He tells her the driver's door is standing open. And then he says the sentence that investigators have been turning over for 33 years. He says, "There's nobody in it." Loretta asks him to hold. She reaches for the second handset. There is a click, and then there is nothing. And the tape runs for another 4 seconds, on dead air, before she stops it. A deputy named Ross Cottrell reaches the scene at 12:09 a.m. He has been on since 4 in the afternoon, and he is 17 minutes from the end of his shift. What his headlights find is a 1984 Chevrolet Cavalier, faded blue, 137,000 miles on the odometer, rust eating up through both rear wheel wells and a coat hanger where the antenna used to be. It is parked at an angle on the gravel apron, front tires pointed slightly toward the ditch, as if the driver had pulled over in a hurry and not bothered to straighten it out. The engine is idling. The headlights are on. The fuel gauge sits just above a quarter tank. The radio is tuned to KVRL out of Salem, 96.3, and it is playing quietly. Cottrell noted in his report that he could hear it from 6 feet away with the door open, and that the song ended and a commercial for a farm implement dealer started while he was standing there. On the passenger seat, there is a brown vinyl purse, unzipped, sitting upright. Inside it, a driver's license issued 11 months earlier, a Bellamy Public Library card, a tube of drugstore lipstick worn down at an angle, a folded work schedule with Tuesday circled twice in ballpoint, and $41 in ones and fives, still bound with the rubber band the diner used for tip money. In the cup holder, there's a styrofoam cup with maybe 2 inches of coffee left in it, no lid, a half moon of lipstick on the rim. Cottrell wrote that it was still warm when he touched the side of it with the back of 2 fingers. Not hot, warm. And there is one more thing, which nobody noticed for another 2 hours, because it was the kind of detail that only becomes important when somebody thinks to ask the right question. The dome light in that Cavalier was burned out. It had been burned out since at least the previous winter. Her mother would confirm it, and so would her boyfriend, who had promised twice to replace the bulb and hadn't. The driver's door was standing wide open on a 2-lane state highway at midnight, on a stretch with no streetlights, no houses within 400 yards, and no moon that night. The almanac for October 4th, 1991, in that part of Missouri, lists a waning crescent that had already set. The inside of that car was completely dark, which raises a problem nobody has solved. A man driving past at 55 miles an hour could see an open door. He could see headlights burning against the fog line. He could not see that the car was empty. To know there was nobody in it, he would have had to slow down. He would have had to stop. He would have had to get out, walk up on a stranger's vehicle in the dark, and look inside it. And then he would have had to drive 4.5 miles to a payphone and refuse to give his name. The car belonged to a 19-year-old named Denise Halloway. She had clocked out of her shift at the Rockhouse Diner at 11:34 that night. The drive from the diner's gravel lot to that patch of shoulder is 8 4/10 miles. At the posted speed, allowing for the 2 curves above Bagnell Branch, it takes 12 minutes. That puts her at the Dunkard Church turnoff at roughly 11:46. The call came in at 11:52. 6 minutes. That is the entire window in which whatever happened to Denise Halloway happened, and in the 33 years since, 2 men have confessed to filling it. One of them recanted 4 separate times in 3 different decades. The other one died 11 days after he opened his mouth, before anyone could put him in a car and drive him to the place he said he'd left her. Neither man was ever charged. There has never been an arrest, there has never been a trial, and there has never been a body. To understand how a case with 2 confessions ends with nothing at all, it helps to go back a few years to a town of 3,400 people where almost nothing ever happened, and to a girl who was 14 months away from getting out of it. Bellamy, Missouri, sits in the Ozark foothills at the line where the farmland gives up and the hardwood takes over. In 1991, the population sign on the north end of town read 3,412, and the 2 had been painted over a 7 sometime in the 80s. There was a bank, a Casey's, 2 churches on the same block that did not speak to each other, a shoe factory that had cut its second shift in 1988 and would close entirely in 1996, and a volunteer fire department with 1 pumper from 1976 that started on cold mornings only if somebody sprayed ether into the intake. The high school graduated between 40 and 60 seniors a year. The nearest hospital was 31 miles away. The county seat, Verrill, was 19 miles east, on a road that took 25 minutes because of the grade. The sheriff's office there had a sworn staff of 11, including the sheriff. It operated 4 marked cars, one of which was usually down. In the 10 years before 1991, that department had investigated exactly 2 homicides. Both were domestic. Both were cleared inside 48 hours, and in both cases the person responsible was still sitting in the house when deputies arrived. Nobody in that building had ever worked a stranger abduction. Nobody in that building had ever worked a case with no victim in it. Denise Halloway was born in Bellamy in March of 1972, the older of 2 children. Her father, Gene, worked the finishing line at the shoe factory for 19 years. In November of 1988, a stack of pallets came off a forklift in the loading bay and caught him across the hips. He died 9 days later at a hospital in Rolla of complications from a pelvic fracture and internal bleeding. Denise was 16. She was in her junior year. She missed 11 days of school that month and made up all of it. Her mother, Marlene, took a job as a nurse's aide at a care home in Salem, 31 miles each way, working 3 12-hour shifts a week and picking up doubles when the schedule allowed. That meant that on most nights, the person putting supper on the table in that house was the teenage girl. Her brother Tommy was 11 when their father died, and 14, the fall his sister disappeared. He would later say that the two of them ate a great deal of tuna casserole in 1989, and that Denise burned it more than half the time, and that he never said anything about it. By the autumn of 1991, Denise had been working at the Rockhouse Diner on Route 19 for 2 years and 4 months. The Rockhouse was a converted filling station with a gravel lot, 8 booths in green vinyl, a counter with 6 stools that spun, a pie case that hummed, and a hand-painted sign out front that had read Rockhouse Diner, homemade pie since 1974. It smelled like coffee that had been sitting since noon, and like the pink powdered soap in the dispenser by the register. It was owned by a woman named Pearl Dunmeyer, 63, widowed, who opened at 5:30 in the morning for the log truck drivers, and who would later tell investigators that Denise Halloway was the only employee she had ever had who counted the drawer twice without being asked to. Denise made $2.01 an hour plus tips. On a Good Friday, she cleared $60. She kept the money in a Folgers can on the top shelf of her bedroom closet behind a stack of folded sweaters, and by the fall of 1991, there was, according to her mother, somewhere between $1,900 and $2,000 in it. She had an application sitting out on her dresser for the community college in Rolla, dental hygiene, spring enrollment, a 2-year program. Tuition and fees for the first year came to a little over $1,800. She had circled that figure on the brochure. She wore a green smock over her clothes at work. Pearl bought them in bulk, a dull sage color, snap front, 2 pockets, the kind of garment that never looks new. Denise's had her name stitched over the left pocket in yellow thread, because a customer's wife, who did embroidery out of her kitchen, had offered to do it for nothing. She had been seeing a young man named Kyle Merrick, 21, who worked at his uncle's tire shop on the east side of Verrill, and who by every account was neither the great love of her life nor a source of any real trouble. They had been together about 7 months. They argued about the things people that age argue about, whether he called when he said he would, whether she was going to move away in the spring and forget he existed. Marlene Halloway did not particularly care for him, and she said so out loud more than once in the first week. She would spend the rest of her life regretting that. For about 6 weeks in the fall of 1991, it was the only thing anyone in Verrill County wanted to talk about. The night of October 4th was a Friday. It was 51 degrees at 10 p.m. and falling toward the low 40s. There had been a hard rain on the 3rd, 1.25 inches, and the ditches along 19 were still holding water. The highway patrol's seen log notes standing water in the north ditch at the turnoff. The diner closed at 11. Denise stayed late to help Pearl break down the pie case and run a mop across the floor, which was normal. She did it 2 or 3 nights a week, and Pearl paid her the extra half hour in cash out of the drawer. At 11:34, she punched out on the time clock by the walk-in. Pearl watched her walk to the Cavalier through the front glass, and Pearl was very specific about this in her statement, because it was the last thing she ever saw the girl do. Denise was carrying a styrofoam cup of coffee in her left hand and her keys in her right. She was still wearing the green smock over her jean jacket. She had not taken it off, which Pearl thought was a little bit odd, because she always took it off. But not odd enough to say anything about, and not odd enough to make Pearl walk out and stand in the lot and watch her pull away. Pearl locked the front door, killed the sign, and drove home in the other direction. The first person to understand that this was not a runaway, was a 28-year-old investigator with the Vero County Sheriff's Office who had been on the job 3 years and who, 33 years later, would still have the case files stacked in his garage in 14 bankers' boxes, with the years written on the ends in marker. He is not the sheriff in this story. He was not in charge of anything in 1991. He was the only person who never stopped. His name is Ward Kessler. Kessler got to the Dunkard Church turn-off at 1:20 in the morning, called out from home, wearing a department jacket over a t-shirt. By then, Deputy Cottrell had run the plate through the state system and had woken Marlene Halloway by knocking on her front door at 18 minutes past midnight. She had come out to the scene in a coat pulled over a nightgown with unlaced shoes, and she had stood at the edge of the gravel apron just outside the headlights, and she had asked one question over and over. Every report from that night records it in slightly different words. Where is she? Where would she go? Where is she? The sheriff at the time was a man named Del Prather, 61 years old, in his 4th term, 14 months from retirement. Prather's initial working theory, and this is documented in his own handwriting on a yellow legal pad that still sits in the file, was that a 19-year-old girl with $2,000 saved and a boyfriend she fought with had gotten into somebody's car and gone to Springfield. He wrote the word voluntary and underlined it twice. Under it, he wrote, "Check bus station, Rolla." Kessler pushed back on that within 12 hours, and he pushed back on the strength of 3 things. The first was the money. The Folgers can was still on the closet shelf, $1,940, counted by 2 deputies at the kitchen table, and photographed in stacks against a ruler. A 19-year-old does not run away from a town of 3,400 people and leave behind the entire reason she was saving. She does not leave $41 of tip money sitting in a purse on the passenger seat with the door open to the highway. The second was the coffee. Pearl Dunmeyer poured that cup at approximately 11:32 from a pot that had been made fresh at 10:50. It was still warm to the touch at 12:09 in a car with the heater off and the door standing open in 50-degree air. That is a window of 37 minutes, and it is consistent with a vehicle that had been sitting on that shoulder for only a handful of them. It is not consistent with a car abandoned at 9 o'clock by a girl who met someone in a parking lot. The third was the blood. At 9:40 on the morning of October 5th, in flat daylight, a crime scene technician from the State Highway Patrol found a smear on the inside edge of the driver's door frame on the vertical pillar at roughly the height of an adult's shoulder. It was small. The report describes it as approximately 4 centimeters by 1.5, oriented downward and slightly forward, consistent with contact transfer rather than spatter. In 1991, the laboratory in Jefferson City could tell them 2 things about it. It was human and it was type O. Denise Halloway was type O, so was roughly 38% of the county. That was the entire scientific value of that stain for the next 22 years. The search began at first light on October 5th, and it was, by any measure, enormous for a place that size. 416 volunteers signed the log over 3 days, factory men on layoff, church groups, a busload of students from the high school in Vero, farmers who brought their own 4-wheelers. The National Guard sent a helicopter out of Fort Leonard Wood for 2 afternoons. 2 bloodhound teams came down from Jefferson County and worked scent articles taken from a hairbrush. Searchers walked the ditches, the fence lines, the cut-over timber on both sides of 19, the abandoned quarry road, and the banks of Sinking Creek, where it runs under the highway a mile and a half south of the turnoff. Divers went into the creek at the low water crossing and into a farm pond on the Vestal Place. They found a dead calf, a stolen mailbox, and 40 feet of copper wire. They did not find Denise Halloway. They did not find her other shoe. They did not find blood on the pavement, or drag marks in the gravel, or a single usable tire impression, because the shoulder at that turnoff is crushed limestone packed hard as concrete by 20 years of loaded log trucks, and because the rain on the 3rd had washed the fine material off the top of it. Kyle Merrick was interviewed 6 times in the first 3 weeks, twice with his uncle sitting in the hallway. On the night of October 4th, he had been at a bonfire on a gravel bar off County Road 512, and 19 separate people put him there from roughly 9 p.m. until nearly 2 in the morning. 3 of them had no relationship to him at all. He took a polygraph in Rolla on October 17th and passed it without qualification. He would be re-interviewed in 1994, in 1999, and again in 2019, and he would say exactly the same thing every single time, and every single time the department would quietly confirm it again. He still lives in the county. He has never spoken publicly about the case. There were other names, and Kessler worked all of them. A long-haul driver who had eaten a patty melt at the counter that evening, and who turned out to have crossed into Illinois before 11, with a fuel receipt to prove it. A man from Cobb Hollow, with a 1987 conviction for second-degree assault, whose alibi was thin but real, and whose truck had a dead battery that week. A drifter arrested in Arkansas in December, who confessed to nothing, knew nothing, and had never set foot in Missouri. By Thanksgiving of 1991, the tip line had logged 311 calls. By the following spring, it was down to 1 or 2 a month, most of them sightings in Springfield or Branson that never survived a phone call. In August of 1992, Sheriff Prather retired and moved to a lake house. His successor left the case open, assigned it to Kessler, and turned the rest of the department loose on a methamphetamine problem that was, in fairness, actively taking the county apart. And then, in April of 1993, a man went mushroom hunting. His name was Delbert Nance. He was 68 years old, retired off the railroad, and he was walking a bench of oak and hickory above the west bank of Sinking Creek, roughly 4 miles downstream from where the divers had gone in 18 months earlier. He was looking for morels, which come up in that country in the 3rd week of April when the ground hits 50 degrees. What he found instead, wedged under a shelf of dolomite in a dry wash and half buried in 2 seasons of leaf litter, was a shoe. It was a white leather Reebok, women's size 7, left foot. The laces were still tied in a double knot. The leather had gone gray-green with mold, but the sole was barely worn on the outside edge, and the insole was intact enough that the laboratory recovered fabric fibers from it. Marlene Halloway identified it on April 22, 1993, in a room at the sheriff's office, from a scuff on the toe box, and from the fact that she had bought that pair at a Payless in Rolla in the spring of 1990, and had argued with her daughter about spending $24 on tennis shoes. Denise had been wearing white Reeboks the night she disappeared. Pearl Dunmeyer confirmed it independently. She remembered because the girl had complained that week about the laces. The right shoe has never been found. That single object rearranged the entire case. 4 miles downstream and up a slope. The wash where it lay is 340 yards from the nearest point a vehicle can reach, on a grade steep enough that Kessler, 30 years old and in good condition, used his hands going up it. Either somebody carried something up that hill in the dark, or the creek carried a tied shoe 4 miles over 18 months and 2 spring floods and deposited it above the high water line, which the Highway Patrol's own hydrology consultant called possible, but described in writing as unlikely to survive intact. They searched that hillside for 9 days in the spring of 1993. 61 acres, grid-walked with flagging tape, shoulder to shoulder. They probed with rods. They dug in 4 locations where the soil profile looked disturbed and where a state anthropologist thought the vegetation was wrong. They found a hog skeleton and a beer can from the 60s. And that was the state of the Denise Halloway case in the fall of 1993. An idling car, a warm cup of coffee, a 4-centimeter smear of type O blood, 1 tied left shoe on a hillside, and a 28-second cassette tape of a man who knew there was nobody in that car on a road where he could not possibly have seen inside it. Then, in February of 1994, a 26-year-old man sitting in the Vero County Jail on a burglary charge told his cellmate that he had killed her. His name was Ronnie Sable. He was from Cobb Hollow, 4.5 miles from the payphone at the Sinclair station. He had 2 prior felony convictions, a stolen vehicle case in 1988 and a second-degree burglary in 1990. And the charge he was sitting on that February would have made him a persistent offender under Missouri law, which at the time carried real exposure. He was looking at as much as 7 years in Jefferson City. He had been in that cell for 31 days. He was known around Cobb Hollow as a man who talked and who told stories about himself that got bigger in the retelling. The cellmate told a jailer on a Thursday. The jailer told a deputy. On February 19, 1994, Ward Kessler sat down across a laminate table from Ronnie Sable in an interview room on the 2nd floor of the Vero County Courthouse with a legal pad, a foam cup of coffee, and a cassette recorder, and over the course of 4 hours and 11 minutes, Ronnie Sable gave a confession. And it was good. That is the thing people forget about false confessions. They are frequently very good, and they are almost never delivered by someone who seems to be lying. Sable said he had been driving south on 19, the night of October 4th, 1991, coming back from a bar in Salem. He said he came up on a blue car sitting on the shoulder with the door open. He said he pulled in behind it. He said there was a girl standing at the front fender and that she had the hood latch open and that she asked him for a ride. He said there was a struggle. He said he put her in his truck. He said he drove her south and west to the creek, and then he said he carried her up. He described the Dunkard Church turnoff correctly, down to the